Welcome to Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast, where we share insights and tips to help you scale your business's online presence, hosting genuine conversations with the best in the web and IT industry, and exploring how the IONOS brand can help professionals and customers with their hosting and cloud issues. We're your hosts, Joe Nash and Liz Moy. Hi, and welcome to the Beyond the Screen podcast. My name is Joe Nash, and I'm your host for today, and I'm joined by Ran Sanghera, who has 15 years of experience in the sustainability field and is now head of sustainability for IONOS. Ran, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Joe. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very excited to have you on the show today and to chat about all things sustainability. And I guess to kick us off, we should deal with the nomenclature and get that out of the way. Can you run us through what is sustainability?
I mean, yeah, that's a really good question. I think probably one that I have to deal with on a kind of day-to-day basis. I think how I actually normally approach that question is I try to break down the preconceptions that people might have of what they think is sustainability. So commonly, I think it naturally, leans into environmental topics, specifically climate change.
Right.
And the second one is also then that it's to do with charitable efforts or supporting your local community. And those are obviously really core parts of sustainability. But I think what people maybe don't realize is that sustainability is such a broad topic, encompasses so many different aspects. And I think maybe what would be good if I just kind of start to give you a little bit more detail on those.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
So yeah, of course, climate change is, an intrinsic part of sustainability, but right. I think even within that planet or environmental pillar, people sometimes forget about biodiversity, water use, pollution, all those other aspects of the environment, but they also link to, climate change.
For sure.
I think another aspect of sustainability that is maybe a little bit under the radar is the people topic as well. So diversity and inclusion is obviously a big part of that, how you engage with your local communities that I mentioned. But what I think also surprises people is when I tell them that sustainability is also about how a company focuses on their company culture, what they're doing to ensure that they have strategies in place to attract talent, to retain them, that they're working on employee engagement, and then also like health and safety, right, and other aspects like that. And then where it gets really kind of gray, where people get really surprised about this is sustainability, is that there's a whole range of governance, compliance, regulatory topics that data privacy, information security is also, to do with sustainability, how you look at sustainability within your supply chains, reaching out to your suppliers. Long story short, what I'm trying to say is it's really complex and broad, but my favorite definition of sustainability is that I see sustainability as essentially a business strategy that allows a company to create long-term value with a specific focus on planet, people, and profit. And that's what I never forget about for me, sustainability makes good business sense. Right. And every sustainability measure or initiative should be adding value to the company.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think the encapsulation of that, planet, people, and profit, I think does a lot to capture the myriad areas that you spoke about. So you said a whole bunch there, so we're going to jump around a little bit as we go back and forth on that. Sure. So I guess to cover that, really broad base of things that sustainability means, I also imagine that means there's lots of ways that people come into this field. So what was your journey? How did you end up, with this interest and finding yourself as head of sustainability at IONOS?
Oh, wow. There's 15 years there, so I tried to keep it like a short and snappy rather than give you like my life story.
Yeah.
But I think when I started off in sustainability, I wasn't really sure. Well, back then, it was a very, very new, emerging niche field. It's not like how it is today. I didn't have a broad choice of jobs to jump into. So I started off in the NGO charity sector with an organization called Friends of the Earth. I was focusing on sustainable food initiatives, how you can, making local communities aware that the benefits of local food, reducing their environmental impact. But I think there I quickly realized that I wanted to work on the corporate side of sustainability. Then I became an environmental business consultant with small to medium sized businesses, local shop owners, SMBs, local small manufacturers. And then I went completely in the opposite direction. And then I became a consultant for investors. And that's also where it's a little bit where people aren't aware that the reason why sustainability, one of the main reasons why sustainability is really becoming so important now is that there's investors pushing the agenda and they want companies to become more sustainable. Anyway, then I did that for about 10 years. And then I realized that whilst I had a great time being a consultant, that essentially that I wanted to work with larger companies on sustainability, be actually, on the ground floor, driving the measures, educating the people that have the power and resources to, make a difference. And then I ended up at IONOS.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a really great point about what you said about investors. It's interesting. I'm starting to get the sense that the fact that, that is one of the areas where change is being driven is starting to penetrate the mainstream, because you see more and more kind of news items breaking about so-and-so big hedge fund no longer will take these stocks, etc. It does seem there is a sea change there. Thank you for running us through that and for making you do the gauntlet of 15 years of history. Really appreciate it. So to go back to, your introduction to sustainability, you mentioned lots of figures who I guess we could call stakeholders in, the future of the planet. Maybe that's a bit of a corporate term for it, but where is, in terms of, driving this change for you and for IONOS as a company, which of those stakeholders from, the people to the customers to the policymakers is most driving that change for you?
That's a good question. I think when I mentioned all those different elements of sustainability, I think every stakeholder has a different interest or driver or topics of sustainability that they're interested in. And then I don't want to downplay that that one interest is more important than the other. But I think I'm probably biased to a point where I worked for the majority of my career with investors. I know that they have the money, to money and the power to force companies to drive change.
For sure.
So by and large, I think for me, and because of my background, they will always be the most important stakeholder. And that doesn't mean companies might not always see the value behind sustainability, or they particularly understand what it's about. Particularly with that, a lot of companies might focus more on the short-term, medium-term profitability rather than seeing addition to long-term value. So for me, investors are great at driving change. They're involved in that regulatory sphere where they're working with, the EU committees and, policymakers to create legislation that drives companies, forward on the agenda. So I think, a lot of sustainability managers are unfortunately quite cynical people, I think. We would like to think that people have good intentions at heart, but sometimes people just need to be pushed.
Within driving any change, there's always a certain amount of working within the existing incentive structure, right? And it seems like investors are key to that incentive structure for, the way that the environment the business is currently operating. So that makes total sense to me.
Actually, on your question quickly. So I think there's also other stakeholders within that sphere, and they're also important. So for me, employees, for one example, right? If your sustainability is a way to, and diversity and those talent attraction and retention initiatives is a way to keep your employees engaged at the company, keep them happy, which makes them productive. That's also, equally important. Another reason why sustainability is becoming, more and more apparent in the media is because there's larger companies who are reaching out to their suppliers and driving that change. So sometimes, but it's also coming from the other side of customers, where companies have larger customers. They're reaching out and they want to work with sustainable companies and suppliers. So
Right. So it's folks who are making, their whole supply chain making sure the whole supply chain is sustainable. So, coming down from your customers, you want to make sure they're using sustainable services from your end, and then equally for IONOS, you want to be making sure that things downstream are sustainable. That makes sense, and I guess it's a good, a beneficial knock-on effect for everyone. So I guess before we move on to IONOS' specific sustainability context, while we're just at this higher level, what are some common misconceptions people have about sustainability? What are some challenges you face in, communicating these concepts?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's a lot of different preconceptions I have, but I guess now, focusing on the digital sustainability aspect in particular, I think, from the conversations that I've had with people or, within, not our customers specifically, but, developers, people with a lot more technical knowledge than, I will ever have, is that there's either two polar extremes. So there's one that the impact of digital sustainability isn't so significant. Right. And so I think people don't, like you said with the title of the podcast, people don't think beyond the screen. They essentially think, there's the battery to, power my phone. There's the battery to power my laptop. Maybe my laptop was manufactured, somewhere in a factory, but, that's essentially it. And then there's the other flip side, which is just a lot of, like clickbait articles of the internet, is killing the planet. The internet has double the amount of carbon emissions than the airline industry. Yeah. And in reality, I'm not trying to say digital sustainability is perfect and there's no impact, but it's kind of like a middle ground. But it's kind of understandable that, people have these, preconceptions. I guess the other aspect as well is that, and one that's still struggle with when people, in addition to people always think it's sustainability is purely about being green and environmental sustainability, bringing them back to this, that it's sustainability isn't just add-on. It's not this additional cost.
It's not just offsetting.
A thing that we can throw on. Maybe it makes a nice bit of marketing for the company. When I see it's really measures will create long-term, value for your company. And I could list off so many different examples of that. And, I do it's part of my job to make people see the value of sustainability rather than it being this nice to have additional add-on extra.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the point about the challenges of digital sustainability in general, and I guess to actually even for a consumer to grapple with, digital sustainability, they already need to have a certain level of literacy about how the cloud even works and what's happening on their client devices and those kind of things, which is, a lot to ask for the vast majority of consumers. So I hadn't thought about that angle on it before. That must be quite the challenge. So I think that leads us nicely into talking about why sustainability matters for a cloud provider at all. I mean, obviously, I guess first up, we have just the size of the operations, right? You're operating a lot of data centers and these are electricity consuming situations. What are the fundamental challenges for a cloud provider in the sustainability field?
So I guess you mentioned the challenges. I think maybe how we address those, challenges and those material impacts, and how IONOS focuses on environmental sustainability, so to start. So beyond the screen we have data centers, the infrastructure that essentially that we use to provide services and products to our customers. So significant amount of energy consumption, significant amount of IT and server waste that is created. So in terms of environmental sustainability, climate change, energy, and circular economy, which in short, is to do with recycling, reuse, and refurbishment. Those are the key material impacts that we have in terms of environmental sustainability. So, how we go about addressing those is when I talk about what IONOS does, I always like to back that up with facts and figures, because that's what I'm always looking for from other companies, right? So not just, this is what sustainability means, what's the actual initiatives, what's the facts and figures to back that up. So I'm really actually proud to say that, since 2018, despite actually continuing to grow as a company during that time, we've actually been able to reduce our absolute energy consumption by about 9%.
Right.
So the reason why we've been able to reduce our absolute energy consumption is, one is, technology develops rapidly, and that's obviously helping us to reduce our energy consumption. But we have a dedicated energy management team in place, and we have had done for several years.
Awesome.
We've got an energy management system in place. It's externally certified.
Right.
And within that, we, for each of our 11 owned data centers, we have energy efficiency targets for each individual data center every year. And that means we will do an evaluation. We identify how we can, improve energy efficiency. We do retrofits, refurbishments, upgrades. We invest in new technologies and equipment. And yeah, that's essentially what has helped us on that journey. On the circular economy part, that's where we obviously have a lot of in the different countries where we work in, we have a lot of different green IT partners. So using the German and French data centers as an example, we work with an organization called AFB.
Okay.
And AFB is once IT equipment or servers get to the end of life, this organization will come, they come and collect the equipment, and then they will actively work to take it apart, determine what can be recycled, what can be refurbished, what can be resold.
Right.
But what I particularly like about AFB is whilst they're helping us with the environmental impact, recycling, reuse, refurbishment, they're also a majority of employer of people with disabilities, more than 50%. Right. So they're not only helping us to create an environmental impact, they're also helping us create a social impact as well.
I was going to say, with the data centers being quite large installations, I imagine, they have a sizable economic footprint in terms of, providing jobs to local areas, and being able to utilize companies like that further increases, the economic opportunities that your center's able to offer to an area they situate in.
Within that was kind of focused on the so we've also had 100% renewable electricity for many years. Or we also have a diesel. We have backup generators for the data centers, and we use diesel, and it's unavoidable. Any organization that has a data center, the vast majority of them have to use diesel, for their backup generators. That's a very small part of our carbon emissions, and we use trusted offsets. We only use offsets as trusted carbon offsets as the absolute last step. It's not the first step. And combined with the 100% renewable electricity for all of our own data centers, and the offsetting the minimal amount of diesel emissions. I don't like using the term climate neutral, but it helps us to avoid and reduce a significant amount of our carbon emissions to the point where you could say we're climate neutral for our direct operations.
Okay, so I want to dig into a couple of things there, just for folks who haven't encountered a lot of these, I guess I don't want to say the problems, but a lot of the challenges of working with offsets or climate neutrality. So you mentioned that you don't want to use the word climate neutral, and you mentioned trusted offsets. Why both those disclaimers?
So this comes back to the kind of preconceptions question. I think my feeling is that customers can get bamboozled with the amount of terms that are out there. To the point where I won't lie, even I'm still bamboozled by them. I'm climate neutral, carbon positive, carbon negative, net zero, science-based targets initiative. So if I'm bamboozled, I become imagine how our customers think. A company can just could make the broad claim and say, hey man, we're climate neutral. Throw some pictures of the trees on their website. Everything's great. But for me, it's how do you achieve that climate neutral claim? Is it because you purchase some low quality, really cheap carbon offset somewhere? And that allows you to make that claim and greenwash, but mislead, your customers. So that's why I avoid using that term. And I think it's to be much clearer about, look, this is how we avoid carbon through, renewable electricity, through reusing and refurbishing IT servers. And this is where we offset as a last step, particularly with trusted projects, because there's a lot of different, it's growing kind of exponentially of all of these different carbon offset projects, lots of different companies springing up in lots of different parts of the world. And I think if you Google it and look in the news, there's a lot of like criticism that's being directed, like that maybe that these projects don't work, they haven't been properly evaluated, maybe they're even actually causing environmental damage. So I think that's where there's a big responsibility on companies to not say we just want to offset, so where's the cheapest, quickest provider that we can find. It's more about a quality provider that's gone through some kind of evaluation, and that. So IONOS specifically, we don't publicize the offsets or the projects that we support, because we want to put more focus on the carbon reduction and avoidance and energy efficiency initiatives. But we've evaluated a list of suppliers and the projects, and we're like, okay, we want to support these ones because they seem good.
They seem to be doing the thing they say they are doing, which
it's
a surprising challenge. So are there any, I guess what we were just saying about consumers and their exposure to, the data centers must to a certain extent be true for employees of IONOS as well. Like, obviously, I don't know whether the vast majority of the company is going into these day on day. Like, how does this thread follow through to your employees and the employee engagement piece?
So what I also wanted to mention was, in addition to the other environmental initiatives, I mentioned that we had a new data center come online in Worcester, UK in October of last year. And I think for us going forward, it's really setting the blueprint of how we will move forward with environmental sustainability. So some examples that, firstly, it's going to be one of our most energy efficient data centers. I mentioned that the carbon emissions from diesel backup generators. We're actually going to have biofuel powered generators, which will help us to reduce the carbon emissions from diesel by 90%. We also have the steel that was used in its construction was carbon offset with trusted suppliers. And for the very first time, we also actually integrated biodiversity aspects into it, and that was a key consideration. So bee and bug hotels to support the local biodiversity, in addition to all of the other 100% renewable electricity. We can it's also climate neutral.
We spoke, lots of people think just climate and they think CO2 and they think global warming. Biodiversity is obviously a hugely important part of sustainability, and is in fact why a lot of that is important. Can you briefly explain to folks like what you mean when you say biodiversity and why you're interested in preserving it?
So I think in terms of our business sector, biodiversity isn't the biggest environmental priority. It's like, climate change, energy, circular economy. We have sites, and we can support the local biodiversity within those regions. So what I mean by biodiversity is flora and fauna, insects, plants, local wildlife. What simple measures or installations can we put in place that could just very easily support the local biodiversity? So there's not just IONOS, but there's also other data center operators that have that in mind. And the primary one is that we can support increased insect populations by just having bee, bug, insect hotels on site. It's a low cost, measure, but can have a big impact. We have a really strong focus on diversity and inclusion, IONOS, and I think it's so important for the people who work here. We're a very diverse company. We have more than 60 different nationalities that work IONOS. And starting with the data, first to show how we've improved over the last year. So since about 2018, I think in 2018 we had 45 nationalities, and today we've got more than 60. In terms of gender diversity, I think in 2018 we had about 18.5% women in management. And today it's closer to about, it's more than 24%.
Yeah.
So it's still not perfect. There's still a long way to go, but, it's slowly moving in the right direction.
For sure. And I like in particular that what you said there was women in management and not just women at the company in general.
Exactly.
That is great to see those numbers move up in particular.
Yeah. I mean, women at the company is higher. It's, closer to about 30%. But yeah, it's moving in the right direction. It's not perfect, but there's momentum there, and the momentum exists because for the last 3 or 4 years we've had a strong focus on diversity and inclusion. So I think that firstly, we've made ourselves accountable. We have we're a public signatory to something called the Charter of Diversity, which means every year we will publish about our diversity efforts.
Yeah.
For our parent company, we actually have a head of diversity in place. She, with a team responsible for driving those efforts. In addition, we really focus on making employees aware about diversity and inclusion. Right? If you create awareness, then obviously, and we create awareness through. We have an annual event called Diversity Days, and essentially what we do is we crowdsource ideas and topics from all the different employees. And we will have a 2 to 3 day event where we have like webinars, presentations, quizzes, in-person virtual events, just on all various aspects of sustainability, diversity. And I think what that does is, firstly, you're educating, you're creating awareness, but we're also then giving a platform to all those different diverse groups, our company, to talk about topics that matter to them. And giving everybody else an awareness of that. So we also have, that's also complemented by a lot of different diversity trainings, unconscious bias, inclusive language, gender diversity. Another aspect is as well that, I mentioned Diversity Days as a platform for those groups, but we also have a lot of diversity groups or affinity groups, so LGBTQ, international community, groups related to different ages, where, all those different groups can come together. They essentially do all of their own, educational awareness initiatives throughout the year. And we also have something called a Women Explore initiative, which is essentially, it's a mentoring program for up and coming female talent in the organization. And then every year we'll have a group of about 30 to 50 women who are a part of this, and they are supported by role models and mentors. The goal is to mentor them so we can hopefully one day have increase the proportion of women in management at the company. But to end on that was like a brief summary of all of the different diversity initiatives we have. One thing that I really love and that I'm a part of this year is that we've actually set a target for all of our managers. That we're making diversity and inclusion trainings mandatory. So by the end of the year, we want to have 80% of our leaders trained on diversity and inclusion. And that's where, now we've accepted, like, you're a manager, you're a leader, diversity and inclusion is part of your job. And we're going to be rolling that out over the course of the year.
That's excellent to hear, as well as, the programs to ensure, that training and mentorship from within to reach the higher ranks rather than hiring out is always very exciting to hear in the tech industry broadly, which encourages very rapid job transitions. So that's wonderful. What should customers be looking for to their cloud providers in terms of, how do they, if I'm a customer and I care about sustainability of my cloud infrastructure, what should I be looking for?
It's important for companies to have long-term targets. So, net zero and climate neutral, carbon negative, positive, those are all important. But companies shouldn't just be looking for, is there a long-term 2040, 50, 60 target? Those are important. I'm not downplaying that, but they really need to be supported by shorter-term targets. And what are the actual initiatives and measures that have happened in the last years, or also happening the short to medium term? That's really important for me. And I think maybe that's where those longer term targets can be impressive, like on paper, but yeah, it's easy to say you're going to do something, 20 years from now, what's
Right.
actually happening at the current moment. So that would be one thing for me. Also, secondly, when we're looking at this, when we're discussing the carbon offsets aspect, is customers should really look for what's actually happening in the company's direct operations. Is it renewable electricity, solar panels, essentially all those different examples of initiatives that I mentioned at IONOS. This is key for me as well. So tree planting initiatives are good, supporting forest regeneration. I mean, those are excellent, but that's in a part, if a company doesn't have sustainability initiatives in their direct operations, it's kind of paying, to solve a solution somewhere else in a different country. So this is, it's not bad, but it needs to be both, not one or the other. It shouldn't just be a long-term target. It should be short-term and long-term. Exactly. It shouldn't just be carbon offsets. It should be direct operations and your value chains. Also, look for data. But I'm a sustainability manager, so sustainability data is my life. I see data, sure. I'm happy. Whether it's improving, deteriorating, gives us something to work from. But that's something customers should be looking for, that transparency of, is this company willing to tell you if they're improving, deteriorate? Even if the company's performance is going down, I think customers should still value that the company is being transparent or share this data. That's one. It's not always
maybe even more so than positive results, right? Exactly, like it means a lot when they're publishing that. How are you marketing the things that you're doing? Knowing that these are what you want customers to be looking for, how are you communicating that information to them and putting your information out there?
So for the moment, it's a bit light because it's something that we're planning on improving over the course of the year. And it's a consequence of our communications essentially were with our parent company, and they're consolidated, together. There's KPIs there, and there's information, but I would say that we're not actually, marketing it so clearly and transparently at the moment. That will change, going.
Bearing in mind, what you said there about what you consider customers should be looking for now and how they're thinking about their operations today. Obviously, not delaying everything to the future and putting off those future goals, as we said, but what does sustainability look like in the next 5 to 10 years? Like, what do you think the perceptions and expectations of people will be for companies like IONOS in 5 to 10 years' time?
Yeah, I think, in terms of expectations, one kind of sentence that I always hear kind of like rubs me the wrong way a little bit is when people are like, sustainability is becoming more important. I've kind of heard that for like the last 15 years or 20 years, right? Like sustainability is becoming more important. And I'm like, yes, it's always been important. It's always been becoming more important, but the scope of stakeholders and the people that are becoming more aware is, changing. And I think that will continue to expand. We'll still continue to hear 5-10 years from now, sustainability is becoming more important. But those critical severe impacts of climate change, the economic impacts will become more severe and apparent. And then that's where I mentioned that the preconceptions of, where people are like, oh, sustainability is this nice to have. I think a lot of companies will become aware this is a key means to preserve and create long-term value of our company. So, I mean, that's from a expectations, news aspect. That's where, I think it will lead. So sustainability won't become more important. It's just the impacts of it will be very apparent to everybody, not just how else it will change. When I was talking about, without going too deep into the details, net zero targets, and that means you're really looking at, you want carbon sustainability data from your suppliers and your value chain. But that is actually really, really difficult at the moment because that data doesn't exist. There's no standards. It's not accurate. So, to achieve net zero, you actually have to essentially work with your supply chain to purchase more carbon friendly, raw materials products. But if you don't have the data in place, it's not actually possible. That's when, companies say, net zero by 2040. I'm like, by 2040, it might be possible, but that data is actually, lacking at the moment. And I think where it needs to happen in the next 5 to 10 years is so that companies can have more tangible net zero scope 3 supply chain measures in place. There actually needs to be this data available somewhere. And considering that the amount of data that is, it's not just the data from your suppliers. Those suppliers have suppliers, and then their suppliers have suppliers. It's just this endless branching out, umbrella of data that all needs to be consolidated together. And whilst I'm not an expert on this, I'm really intrigued by the possibilities of green ledgers or the blockchain to somehow, bring all that data together in an online form somewhere where it's readily accessible by companies to actually create, tangible measures. Maybe that's like too, out there and abstract. Maybe for I hope it's not too abstract and out there for some of the members, audience members to understand. But it's all about improving the quality of that data so we can create actual tangible measures, to move forward. I mean, in terms of, that's where people's expectations, that's what one aspect is the data. I think in terms of actual data center sustainability, the next 5 to 10 years, energy efficiency, technology and measures, they kind of move so fast. It's almost not even, I don't even think it's possible to envision what a data center will look like, 10 years from now. I think there's going to be an increased focus on water efficiency, biodiversity. I think by 2030, a lot of data center operators, will have 100% renewable electricity. They'll likely start or having completely moved away from diesel emission-based backup generators to, maybe battery-powered ones or, biofuel. And then once those aspects are in place, then you could say all of those data centers are actually climate neutral, for their own operations. And then what comes next is a continued focus on energy, water, biodiversity, and other aspects that I can't even imagine yet because they don't exist. Oh, hang on. One aspect that's being talked about is reusing heat energy, within data centers. So that in 10 years, that could be one aspect. So at the current moment, that the two, data centers create heat. That heat is then obviously just goes into the atmosphere. It's like wasted,
or into water for cooling. And
exactly, But if governments can, local governments, national governments can create the infrastructure where that can be returned to the local energy grids and can be, sent to other locations for heating purposes. So circular energy heat transfer is essentially what they're calling it. But at the current moment, the infrastructure doesn't exist in place. So a lot of data center operators would like to do that, but without actual infrastructure in place, it's more of a future long-term consideration.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Actually, this one's completely out there. I think you're talking about ideas like district heating, where you have and then data centers keys into that. But I think I saw recently there's now a swimming pool in the UK that's heated by a data center underneath it or something like that. All kinds of baffling ideas for that. But that is like, I think that is a really exciting area because it just kind of gets to what you were saying earlier about the importance of looking to companies like direct contributions. If a company is thinking about like, hey, we are producing something here and we should reframe that from waste into how can we use this, in its current form, that kind of thinking just shows that they're taking it seriously, right? Which is very exciting to me. Well, I think we're coming up on time. So this has been a wonderful overview of all the sustainability and everything you're doing. I want to end on, I guess, you've already shared a little bit about some of the things in the future you're most excited about, but in terms of, I guess, the future from a technical angle, to go to your point about green ledgers, is there any technology right on the horizon, anything that you think is really going to elevate the sustainability game from a technological perspective that you're excited about?
Well, I jump on the AI bandwagon like everybody else. And I think there's already some good solid examples out there of, I'm interested in seeing how potentially data models, AI, could be used to improve energy efficiency within the data centers. So that's something that we've already actually looked at in the past and done some pilot projects. But I think now, obviously, 5 years, and obviously the software, technology is, vastly improving. So I think that's something that we could be potentially interested in coming back to, building up data models of our, data centers, all the different variables. How can we, leverage that to even further, improve upon our energy efficiency?
Well, thank you so much, Ran. This has been wonderful. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Joe. Appreciate it.
Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast. To find out more about IONOS and how we're the go-to source for cutting-edge solutions in web development, visit ionos.com and then make sure to search for IONOS in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at IONOS, thanks for listening.